and consultant specializing in working with complex trauma. She developed the Rhythm of Regulation clinical training series and lectures internationally on ways polyvagal theory informs work with trauma survivors. Deb is the author of The Polyvagal Theory in Therapy, Engaging the Rhythm of Regulation, Polyvagal Exercises for Safety and Connection, 50 Client-Centered Practices, co-editor of the clinical applications of the polyvagal theory, the emergences of polyvagal informed therapies, and she's also the creator of the polyvagal flip chart. So really what I've come to understand is that Deb is helping us to really have some literacy around our nervous systems as well as those we work with. And so I'm really could not be happier to participate in today with you as well as to turn it over to Deb so that we can get started. As a reminder though, we are going to have a few things to refer to, those tools that I mentioned. Fung is going to chat in, I think she did, there are some resources and the slides as well. She chatted in a ctacny.org link for you to go to so that you can access those things. And we are going to also record today so that we will send around only to those that have signed up for this clinical intensive. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to you, Deb. Thanks so much.
Great. All right. So welcome. It's lovely to see so many faces. I like this. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can begin to dive in and kind of get an idea of the nervous system, and then go through two of the organizing principles today with some practices. We'll do the third organizing principle next week with some practices. So the autonomic nervous system is what? And we think about it in the clinical world, it's the platform for our lived experience. It's the heart of our daily experience. Everything begins with our nervous system. It's where our internal surveillance system lives. It's our embodied system. And we can think of it as a biological resource that each one of us has. As we begin to learn to shape our systems towards safety and connection and regulation, that biological resource becomes stronger for all of us. And I like to think it's where our stories begin, because even though our brain actually makes up the story, that story begins in our nervous system and then is fed up to our brain, the energy. And then our brain's job is to make sense of what's going on in our nervous system. So state creates story is what we say in the polyvagal world. So let's think first about the autonomic impact of trauma to the nervous system, right? So trauma sidetracks the development of regulation. When we grow up in trauma-saturated, dangerous environments, we don't get to exercise what's called the circuitry of connection. We don't get to engage in those ways. And so instead of creating these patterns of connection that support us in both physical and psychological well-being, we create patterns of protection, these adaptive survival responses, which are absolutely understandable and also impact our capacity to engage in the world, right? So social engagement becomes dangerous, and instead we have these survival responses that we enter into. So when we grow up in these environments, in these situations, have these experiences, co-regulation is often unavailable or actually dangerous. We grow up with people who are not attuned caregivers, not safe and regulated beings. And without that, our nervous system feels lost, right? We need safe, regulated, and regulating beings, healthy adults to be around us. So when that's not available, or when it's in fact dangerous, when the people around us are actually dangerous to us, or absent, unpredictably present, neglectful, then we depend on self-regulation instead. And because developmentally, co-regulation is supposed to come before self-regulation, when this order is reversed, self-regulation is often ineffective or inadequate to actually bring us into regulation and nourish our nervous system. So if you think about your clients for a moment, the people you work with, you probably see many examples where clients are making their way through the world depending on self-regulation, because co-regulation was not available or was dangerous, and it's a missing experience in their nervous system. Right? You might even think about one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to use our own systems to begin to understand polyvagal theory, because polyvagal theory is not something that we do here, it's something we do here, right? So we understand it, but then we embody it. So you might even think about your own experiences, when you were growing up, perhaps co-regulation was unpredictably available or unavailable or even dangerous, and think about the way your nervous system, very creatively helped you survive by bringing self-regulation on board. And then perhaps there are things you've done as you've grown up and recognize this to be able to move back into co-regulation. So we have three organizing principles that we're going to talk about in our two sessions: neuroception, hierarchy, and co-regulation. And neuroception and hierarchy are where we're going to go today. Co-regulation we're going to do next time. So neuroception is detection without awareness, because it's the way our nervous system takes in information without the benefit of our thinking brain. And hierarchy are these three predictable pathways of response that polyvagal theory outlines: ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal. We're going to take those one at a time. So let's start with neuroception. And neuroception is a word that Steve Porges created, because there was no word that described how the nervous system takes in information, right? Perception is a cognitive experience, and the nervous system, again, is a subcortical piece of our biology. So perception didn't fit. So I love that he created neuroception. I think it's a beautiful word. Neuro for neural, and ception for awareness. So it's this beautiful description of how we take in information. And the nervous system is responding to cues of safety and danger through three streams of awareness: inside, outside, between. So we're always looking at those three pathways in order to find what is our nervous system hearing, seeing, sensing for cues of safety and danger. And the first thing we're going to do is I'm simply going to invite you to go on an autonomic adventure with me by just tuning into your neuroception. Okay, I'm going to show you some images, and I'd like you to see whether you can stay out of the cognitive story, which is hard because it comes pretty quickly, and just notice, ooh, am I feeling like I want to move towards this image? Am I feeling as though I need to get away from it? Or am I feeling as though I'm just simply disconnecting from it? So those sort of are the three general responses your nervous system will bring you. So let's go on an adventure. So I'm going to invite you to just notice, how did those slides land in your system? Right? Where did your system take you? And take a moment and reflect on a particular slide that might have touched you in some way. Either brought one of those survival responses or brought a sense of a longing to connect with. So take a moment and just notice which slide brought you a response that felt powerful in your system. Perhaps which slide brought you a response that was unexpected. And then maybe a response that you're curious about. And if we were all in a room together, we could share what happened in our nervous systems. And what we would find is that we have many different responses to the same image, right? So the ones that I usually um, talk about are the blue door, the steps leading up to the blue door, right? We have very different responses to that. And we can even have different responses to that slide on different days. So if you watch the replay of this on another day, you may have different response to the same slides because your nervous system is feeling more or less resilient in that moment. So the blue door, I often get, people who are want to go up the steps and are curious to open the door, see what's behind it. People who the door feels menacing and they want to get away as quickly as they can, or people who simply disconnect from the slide totally, right? It's a lovely mix of experiences. The other one is the slide of the teddy bear, right? Which either, depending on where your state takes you, is either a well-loved teddy bear or an abandoned, maltreated teddy bear, right? So again, just noticing what happens for you. And this really takes us to our responsibility around neuroception. Our responsibility is to tune into what happens in our own nervous system, is to be able to notice it, name it, know it in the moment, and then be curious about what's happening in another nervous system. So if you think first about, think about a client that you're working with, someone you're working with, and think that you and that person may have very different responses to the same experience, to the same moment in time, right? And so this is where neuroception takes us: is, oh, this is what happened for me in response to this moment. How did that land in your nervous system, or where did that take you? Right? To never assume, right? Because although the nervous system is organized along general um, organizing principles that we're learning, we also have our own unique experience around that. Our system is shaped through our own experience. So, what happens in my system? And be curious about what's happening in another system. And we have these things that happen when there's a match, when neuroception is accurately reading what is going on in my world. It's going to then activate the autonomic state that brings me the right amount of energy to manage the moment. Right? That's when there's a match. My nervous system brings me the energy I need to manage the experience successfully. Right? And that's what we're looking for. For many of us and for many of our clients who come to treatment, there is a mismatch. And these are the kinds of mismatches that we have. There's either this inability to calm our defense systems when we're actually in a safe environment, right? Because the nervous system keeps us habitually activated in this hypervigilant, alarmed response pattern. It's not getting the cues of safety that may actually be present. It's keeping us alarmed, on the lookout, can't calm, can't rest. That's a mismatch, that there actually may be cues of safety. We may be in a safe environment, but our nervous system hasn't been updated yet to be able to take that in. The other mismatch is when we can't activate our defense when we actually are in a risk environment, right? We don't get the accurate cues of danger in this one, right? Our nervous system response doesn't bring us enough energy to adequately meet the moment. So whereas the first, we don't get the cues of safety, and so we're hypervigilant, alarmed. In this second mismatch, we don't get the cues of danger, and we go around sort of in this dulled, unaware state, right? I wonder, and I put this in here, I wonder if high risk taking is also this, not getting the accurate cues of danger, the intensity of them. So hypervigilant, alarmed, dulled, unaware, and think about, people in your life, people you work with. Even think about your own way that you navigate through the world, and you may find, that you lean more towards one of these than the other. We have clients who are stuck in one of these mismatches or the other. So remember, neuroception works below the level of awareness, and so we don't actually ever work directly with neuroception, right? We feel what happens when we have a neuroception of safety or danger, but we don't work directly with it. So what we have to do is bring perception, bring our thinking brain online to turn towards the neuroception, bring perception to our neuroception. And then we ask the discernment question, because that's where we begin to explore, is this needed, right? So the discernment question is, in this moment, in this place, with this person or these people, is this response needed, or is this level of response needed? That's the discernment question. And so, I'm going to invite you to think for a moment recently when you felt you had an intensity response that was out of proportion to the moment. See if you can remember a moment like that. Something that felt either too big or too small for the moment. And then ask the discernment question. Remember the moment and think, in this place, in this moment, with this person or people, was that response needed, or was that level of response needed? Right? And if the answer is yes, then it's pointing us towards, wow, neuroception is giving you accurate cues in that moment, and you needed either the survival response or the connecting response. If the answer is, I don't think that intensity of response was needed, then it's letting us know that a familiar cue from the past has reached into the present and activated that neuroception at a level that, is not needed in this moment, right? That there actually was more safety or more danger present, and we didn't get that accurate reading. So I'm going to invite you to do this for a moment, because the clinical question is, in this moment, does your neuroception sense me as a restorative resource or as a threat? I know that I am always wanting to be a restorative resource to my clients, to the people I work with, to you today. And I also know that sometimes neuroception senses me as a threat. Something I do, a movement I make, something in my background, a word I use, a way I say something can be a familiar cue of danger. So I'm going to invite you to do this practice. And if you have something to write on, it's really great to write down what you discover, because you're getting to know your nervous system. And as you do this, this is exactly the same thing I would do with clients. So you're getting that practice. So we're going to look at the cues of safety and cues of danger in these three streams: inside, outside, and between. And I'm going to invite you to start on the inside pathway. So at this moment, in or on the skin surface of your body, can you find one cue of danger and one cue of safety? And your neuroception is sending you one cue of danger, one cue of safety in your body, inside, in that embodied pathway, or on your skin surface. Could be an ache or a pain, or a hunger or a thirst. Could be a heart rate that feels odd, or a breath that's odd, some cue of danger. And then a cue of safety might be the opposite, a sense of internal ease, a rhythm that feels good, an absence of pain. So one cue of danger and one cue of safety inside. And then we're going to move to the outside pathway. So in this moment, in your immediate environment, so in the space you are in, can you find one cue of danger and one cue of safety? Might be a noise, might be something you see. Maybe the shape of the space you're in. One cue of danger, one cue of safety in your immediate environment. And write down what your nervous system sends you for information. We're beginning to listen to the autonomic communication. Right? This is the polyvagal informed way to listen to what your nervous system is telling you. We're information gathering at the moment. So let's move out from your immediate environment to a larger environment. So move out of the room you're in, and you could go into the larger structure, or outside into the world around the place you're in, and listen there for a moment. One cue of danger and one cue of safety in that larger environment, neighborhood, community, wherever you want to go. What does your neuroception send you for one cue of danger and one cue of safety? And then we're going to come back and we're going to think about the between. So at this moment in your connection with someone else, could be someone you may be with someone in your space. That would be lovely. And so not happening much anymore. Could be with me. It could be with someone you're just thinking about. So as you bring to mind your connection with another person, that relational space between one cue of danger and one cue of safety that your nervous system brings you. And again, just inviting you to write this down. If you're doing this with clients, you want to begin to create this composite of the cues of danger and the cues of safety. Right? Because what we can begin to do is reduce cues of danger and replicate cues of safety. So let's think about this through our nervous system. Being safer does not necessarily make us feel safer, right? And we've learned that in many ways over this year of the pandemic. Many of our social systems are focused on the features of danger, and yet we have a profound sensitivity to the features of safety. This is Steve's beautiful work, and exposure to these can foster resilience. So, this is a both and experience that we need. Both and reduce cues of danger and replicate cues of safety. So we're talking about neuroception as this passive pathway because it's monitoring below the level of awareness, inside, outside, between. And then we have the active pathways that we're all trained in, right? What do we do? How do we help change what's going on with clients? Therapy models, processes, procedures, the ways we're trying to consciously influence the autonomic state. And what we've learned is that we have to regulate the passive pathways of neuroception first. There has to be enough safety coming in through those pathways in order to be able to effectively work with the active pathways. So we can't engage in our therapy models, practices, processes when neuroception is overwhelmed with cues of danger, right? Because then the nervous system is going to take our clients into a survival response. And once they go to survival response, change is no longer possible. The system is closed to change. Right? So this is the both and. Reduce or resolve cues of danger and actively experience cues of safety. Right. And what's interesting is when we are feeling the cues of danger, and because we have a negativity bias built in, that's how we're created, all of us, we often miss or misread the cues of safety that are actually there. So we want to look for them. And we have to pay attention to both of these. Otherwise, our clients can't fully experience well being. And I know that as clinicians, we're always working to reduce cues of danger. We're working with the things that brought our clients to us, the services, the suffering that they're in. So we have to reduce or resolve those cues of danger. We want to also remember we have to actively experience cues of safety to come to that place of well being. And safety is not a cognitive experience, it's an embodied one. Right? So your brain, if I asked you to fill in the sentence safety is, your brain would have lots of thoughts. But what we know is that the brain can't create safety. It is an embodied experience. It's a nervous system experience. And a safe environment is a healing environment. And the way we create that safe environment is by listening to our nervous system. Our nervous system will tell us, what do we need to feel safe in this moment? Right? What's the cue of danger that's come in? And what's a cue of safety that we need to invite in? So that's neuroception. It really is the fundamental place we begin. And every micro moment to micro moment, your nervous system is looking around is listening through those three pathways, inside, outside, between, and is then um, having your nervous system enact a state, a state change, a survival response, a movement into connection and regulation. Something happens every micro moment in response to neuroception. So let's move now to the hierarchy, the second organizing principle that we're going to talk about today. And just a reminder that the nervous system has sympathetic and parasympathetic, and parasympathetic is made up of ventral and dorsal, primarily made up of ventral and dorsal, right? This is how we get polyvagal. There are two vagal pathways in the parasympathetic nervous system. And here's what polyvagal theory tells us, that there's a hierarchy in our nervous system of the ways we respond. Right? And so at the top of the hierarchy is the newest part of our nervous system, the newest part of the parasympathetic, which is ventral vagal. And this is the system of safety and connection. Right? This is the system that allows us to be together, to communicate, to cooperate, to be connected through many different pathways. And this is where health, growth, and restoration happen. These are three words that Steve put together long ago and just seem to really fit for a ventral vagal experience: health, growth, and restoration. Right. And then if we move down the hierarchy, the next oldest part of the nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system. And we call that a system of mobilization. Right. The survival response is fight and flight, so protection through some kind of action. Sympathetic nervous system is also a system that helps us have energy in more regulated ways throughout the day. We're going to learn about that in a moment. And then at the bottom of the hierarchy, the oldest part, the very first part of the nervous system, is the other aspect of parasympathetic, the dorsal vagal system. And this is the system of immobilization. Right? This is the system where the protection is through some flavor of disappearing. We collapse, we disconnect, we shut down, we float away. Some flavor of this. This is dorsal. And what we know because of polyvagal theory is that we move through our nervous system states in this order. This is a hierarchy, it's a hierarchical order. So I'm in ventral. My next step, if I'm challenged by too much going on, I'm overwhelmed by my world, my next step is into sympathetic mobilization. And if sympathetic mobilization does not fix the problem, help me meet the moment, then at some point I'm going to end up at the bottom in immobilization, dorsal immobilization. And then in order to get back from dorsal to ventral, I need to go through some sympathetic mobilization, not fight flight, but some mobilization. We're going to play with that in a minute. So here is the vagus nerve, an image of it, an old wood carving of cranial nerve 10, which is the vagus. It's probably not anatomically correct, but I do love this image. You can see why the vagus is called the vagus. Vagus is Latin for wanderer, and it wanders throughout our body, starting in the brainstem, in the medulla, and then it travels down through your lungs, heart, diaphragm, stomach, and then it connects upward with nerves in the neck, throat, eyes, and ears to form an actual face-heart connection. And this is the beauty of this nerve. It both regulates on its own and connects with these other cranial nerves. And here's an image of the division of the vagus. Right, the vagus is actually a bundle of nerves that exit the brainstem together, and ventral is from the diaphragm upward. It's innervating experiences from the diaphragm upward, creates healthy homeostasis. The dorsal is diaphragm downward, subdiaphragmatic. And its daily function, in its everyday role, it regulates our digestion, right? It brings us nutrients to nourish us. That's its job, right? It's when it moves into a survival response that, first of all, our digestion is dysregulated, but psychologically, we move out of awareness, out of connection, into collapse. Right? So there's both a physical and a psychological component to each of these. Right? Healthy homeostasis, when ventral is overseeing the system, safe and engaged, connect, communicate. When we move into a survival response, when ventral is no longer available, um, go to dorsal, out of awareness, out of connection, into collapse, and digestion is impacted. And then we have sympathetic, which is a spinal nerve system, whereas the parasympathetic is um, a cranial nerve system. Sympathetic is a spinal nerve system, exiting middle part of your spinal cord, thoracic and lumbar, pretty much. And in its everyday responsibility, it regulates breath and heart rhythms. It brings us mobilizing energy to make it through our day. Okay? But when it is enlisted in a survival response, when we no longer have ventral energy, we're simply in sympathetic survival, fight and flight is where we go. And this HPA axis that you see an image of, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, um, places in our body are connected by a circuit. And when we enter into fight and flight, that circuit gets activated and floods us with cortisol and adrenaline. That's the fight and flight experience, right? Cortisol and adrenaline flooding our system. So we want to talk about this important component of the ventral vagal system, which is called the vagal brake, right? And one of the things you have in the handouts is a worksheet that talks about exercising the vagal brake and goes through this experience. So one of the things that I'm going to invite you to do between now and the next time we meet is to play around with your vagal brake. So we'll just look it over here and try it on for size here together, and then you can play with your own experience between sessions. So the vagal brake is a circuit, a ventral vagal circuit so it comes from your medulla to your sinoatrial node, which is the pacemaker of your heart. And its job is to regulate your heart rate to between 60 and 80 beats per minute, right? That's its job. And if the vagal brake was not around, your heart would beat dangerously fast all the time. So it's an important component of our autonomic nervous system. And I'm going to show you this image. So the vagal brake is that red pathway, right? And then the sympathetic cardiac nerves are the purple pathway. And it's the red pathway that is allowing more or less of the energy in that sympathetic purple pathway to be felt. So the brake is functioning as any efficient braking system does. It relaxes to allow more to go faster, to have more of whatever it is, and then it re-engages to slow down or have less. Right? So again, the vagal brake brings flexibility. This is the part of our system that allows us to make transitions easily. We can mobilize so we can use the energy of sympathetic without going into a survival response. So without that HPA axis activating. And then we can return to calm when we no longer need that much energy, right? So as I'm teaching here, as I'm with you here, my vagal brake is allowing more sympathetic into my system so that I can show up and be here with you. And then afterwards, when I relax for lunch, it will re-engage and help me come back to baseline for a bit. That's its job. These are these two pathways. And the thing we want to remember is it's the vagal brake that's doing this work, right? It's opening and closing the door to sympathetic. So the invitation is to step into the energy of your sympathetic system while staying anchored in the regulation of your ventral system. Right? That's really what we're doing with clients. When clients come to us, their vagal brakes are not working as efficiently as they need to. It's not that they're not working, because one of the things we recognize is that on every inhale, your vagal brake releases just a little bit. And then on every exhale, your vagal brake re-engages. So on every inhale, your heart rate speeds up just a little. And on every exhale, it comes back to baseline. So, with clients, we can reassure them your vagal brake is working, right? Because on every breath cycle, it's doing its job. It's just not working as efficiently as we need it to. So we're going to explore how to have the vagal brake be exercised so that it gains more capacity to help with transitions, right? As the vagal brake gets more efficient, works better, we have less moments of being pulled into survival responses. We find our way back to regulation more quickly, and the response is not so intense. So that's one of the ways we measure, right? We measure how is this work we're doing impacting the vagal brake, and we can measure by frequency, intensity, and duration of dysregulated or regulated responses. So I'm going to invite you to play for just a moment, and then that worksheet will help you create your own vagal brake experience. So, two ways that I like to play with, one is movement and the other is imagery. And actually, when you use imagery, you also probably bring a movement to life with it. So I'm going to invite you to play with the movement on your own because it's a standing and stepping experience where you actually do use your feet to step in and out of sympathetic energy. So you can do that on your own. I'm going to invite you for this moment to work with image with me for a moment and think of an image that for you could represent your vagal brake. And the only requirement is it has to be something that you can actively control the dimensions of, the flow of, the intensity of. Some of the things that people often use are dimmer switches, volume control knobs, doors really that you open and close, windows you open and close, curtains, screens. I use the brakes on a bicycle because that's where I first um, explored my vagal brake, and it's just stuck with me. So I release the brakes a bit as I want to go faster, and I re-engage them as I want to slow down. So just connect with your nervous system and sit for a moment and invite an image that you could work with to operate your vagal brake, to bring more energy in, and then come back to calm when you don't need that energy. Play around with an image. What I've discovered is often the first image is the one that we end up with, but we need to play around with a few along the way. Just has to be something that you can manipulate. Then we're going to just test the image for a moment, just do a brief experience. See, and we're going to tie it to your breath first. So with your image, imagine changing the image on an inhale so that you have more energy in your system. So for me, it would be releasing the brakes a bit. And then on an exhale, re-engaging with your image. So for me, it would be engaged, bring the brake brakes back. If it's a door, on the inhale, you open the door a bit, and on the exhale, you close the door a bit. Somebody a while ago had a bridge they opened and closed, which is beautiful. On the inhale, they opened the bridge, and on the exhale, they closed it again. So again, playing with your own image, whatever that is. Inhale, allow more in. Exhale, come back to baseline. And if your image has a movement associated, like mine does with the brakes on the bicycle, go ahead and add the movement either in your mind's eye or actually doing it just to see what that feels like, to bring movement and image together. And then once you have sort of a sense of, oh, this is how my vagal brake works, and I can connect it through image and or movement, then we use it um, to meet a moment. And that's the second part of this practice, and it's also on your worksheet. So I'm going to invite you to try this once with me here so that we get the flavor of it. So I want you to think of an experience where you need a little bit more energy to meet that moment, right? Something that brings just a slight need for more energy, maybe something that feels a bit challenging. And so you need more of your sympathetic energy, but not sympathetic survival. So as you imagine that moment, Imagine releasing your vagal brake to just the right space where you have that enough sympathetic energy. So open the door to the right amount so you have access to sympathetic while still anchored in ventral. Use your image. Change it so you have the right amount of energy to meet that moment. Imagine meeting the moment. And then when that is over, re-engage your vagal brake so that you come back to baseline. And when I do this with clients in the first place, and this is we're doing this together, they're sharing what their image is, their motion. I'm going to go into the experience with them. It's important to start with just a slight challenge, right? If you're using a 1 to 10 scale, in the 1 to 3 range, right? And do that a few times until you get used to doing this and you say, oh, my vagal brake works. Then you could move up to 4 to 6, right? The goal is as you practice this, it becomes easier and easier to engage your vagal brake in just the ways you need to meet a moment, to be able to um, effectively stay under the influence of your ventral regulation and have enough energy to manage whatever is happening. So again, I'm going to invite you to practice this, play with this between now and the next session. This is an important component because here's what happens. Here's our hierarchy in action with the vagal brake laid over it. Right, so we're in ventral, we're between ventral and sympathetic because the vagal brake is relaxing and re-engaging and helping us stay in that place. Right, need more energy, can come to calm. Need more energy, come back to calm. That's a ventral experience. Once our system is overwhelmed by a challenge and we enter sympathetic survival, the vagal brake is released. It now is no longer there for us to engage with. Instead, we have that HPA axis with cortisol and adrenaline. So we lose the brake and we gain cortisol and adrenaline, right? And if our action taking here can, in some way, resolve what's happening or get us out of what's happening, then the vagal brake can re engage and we can come back to ventral. If what goes on here is not resolvable, if we feel trapped, stuck, or simply can't keep the energy moving, then we go down to dorsal, to that place of collapse, disconnect, disappear. But once your vagal brake has gone, when you enter sympathetic, it's no longer has anything to do with moving between sympathetic and dorsal, right? And again, if we look at this stepwise hierarchy from dorsal, we have to step through some of the mobilizing energy of sympathetic to get back to ventral where our vagal brake can re-engage, right? And it's important to remember that we don't want to move into the fight, flight, HPA axis of sympathetic. We move out of dorsal because that's a dangerous place to be. We simply need some energy. We're going to play with that in a minute too. So emergent properties, this is what happens from each state. We call them emergent properties. It's what's possible from each state. And from one of those states of protection, either mobilization or disconnection, survival is our only goal. Right? The nervous system has entered a survival state and it's working in service of your survival period. And when we're in that place, those survival responses close our system to connection and to change. So if I'm in a sympathetic survival, fight and flight, or a dorsal disconnect, I no longer can be in connection with you. Not because I don't want to be in connection, but because my biology does not support it any longer. Right? And that's important for us to remember that biology does not assign motivation or moral meaning to an experience. It simply enacts the response in service of your safety. Okay, so if I'm gone to sympathetic or dorsal, I can't be in connection because my biology doesn't support that. It's only from ventral that I can connect and that health, growth, and restoration are possible, only from ventral. So in some ways, the polyvagal roadmap is a pretty simple one to follow. It's not easy to use, but it's simple to follow. We need ventral overseeing our system in order to engage in therapy and in order to navigate life in a way that brings well-being. So I put these states on a ladder. This is my autonomic ladder, which is the easiest way. I have found to work with this and to work with clients. You also have in the handouts a PDF of your own ladder and the mapping directions. So we're simply going to talk about the states, and I'm going to invite you, if you haven't already, I'm going to invite you to complete your personal profile map, that ladder, between now and the next time we meet. So ventral, I put at the top. Right? You can see this lovely stick figure who's pretty happy and engaged with the world and has lots of possibilities from that place at the top of the ladder. Sympathetic, we move down into fight and flight, and there are less options down here. And then at the bottom of the ladder is this dorsal stick figure who you can feel the disconnect, shut down, immobilized place. And again, has to climb the rungs through dorsal, through sympathetic to get to ventral. I like a ladder because it gives us the sense of rungs. And, there's not simply one flavor of ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal. There are many flavors of these states. And I like the rungs because you can sort of feel where you are. So let's start with ventral at the top of the ladder and see what happens here. And this is a place of both and. Right? This is the both and experience. We both co-regulate and self-regulate. We can do both, right? In a way that nourishes us. We connect through these four pathways of connection, right? And the four pathways are self, others, the world, and spirit. Right? And remember, these are emergent properties of this ventral vagal state. So it's only in ventral that I have access to this. Only in ventral can I connect to these four pathways: self, others, the world, and spirit. I can tune into the moment and tune out any distractions. I'm both resourced and resourceful. I can reach out for and offer support. Isn't this a lovely place to inhabit? Right? Explore options. So many stories are possible here. Compassion, self-compassion, flexible and resilient. And here's where hope lives. Right? So the stories that emerge from a ventral state are stories of possibility. Right? They carry flavors of hope, options, looking forward, engaged, navigating from a place where I'm organized and feel safe enough to move through life. And those four pathways of connection. Right? It's a lovely place to be. And when you do your map, you really get to know this state in a more deep way. And then here, if we think about sympathetic, we move down the ladder. Right? And here we have a sense of unease and impending danger. You can feel a flavor of neuroception of danger. Right? And here we get mobilized into fight and flight, where there's this active aggression or escape. This is anxious or angry. Right? This is the flavor here. We're alarmed and hypervigilant. And I want to stop here for a moment and think about the difference between being alarmed and being alert, because there's a huge difference in our biology, and so there's a huge difference in our psychology. Right? In ventral, when my vagal brake has relaxed and I have a lot of sympathetic energy in my system, I can be alert. I can be ready. Right? I can be on guard in a way that allows me to be productive, where my prefrontal cortex is right there with me, ready to take action. When I move into sympathetic and I move into an alarmed state, I'm now in a survival response, and my prefrontal cortex does not work in the same way. Right? My prefrontal cortex is hypoactive. It is not going to work in a way that brings me the ability to problem solve and plan. So I can't be alert. I'm now alarmed, hypervigilant, and in fact, I am less safe because I don't have the benefit of connection to my prefrontal cortex. And when clients feel the subtle difference of this, they get it, right? Because clients will often tell me, I have to be in this place in order to feel safe, in order to pay attention. And when we can get a moment of tasting what it's like to pay attention from ventral safety, and then compare it to paying attention from alarmed survival, it's a very different experience. So, in this state of sympathetic survival, we're looking and listening for danger, and we miss and misread the signs of safety. So, the signs may actually be here, as in the experience you did with neuroception when I asked you to find one cue of danger and one cue of safety. We have to look for those because we miss them because of our negativity bias. There's a sense of separation here. We're cut off from others and we're disconnected from those four streams of connection, right? Four streams: self, other, world, and spirit, no longer available to me. So whereas in ventral, I'm feeling connected and feeling a kinship with others. In sympathetic, you have now gone from being friend to foe, right? Because this is a place where it is all about survival, about my survival. So, a very different experience here. And then let's see what happens when we go to dorsal, right? We've gone to the bottom of the ladder, right? And our body actually goes into conservation mode. Okay, our heart rate slows down, our breath gets shallow and short, um, our digestion changes, the blood flow to our brain and the oxygenation of that blood to the brain changes, which means our state, our psychological state actually shifts. We become numb in our body and we get foggy in our thinking. We're collapsed in some way, right? Either in an external collapse, which we notice easily in our clients when the head is down and there's a folding in. You can feel that in your own system. Your posture changes. You're no longer looking up and out into the world, right? Or there can be an internal collapse where I can feel that collapse inside, but I'm not showing it yet to the outside world. We're disconnected. We feel untethered, disconnected from the moment. We're floating. It's got some flavor of that feeling. Dissociation is the full, experience probably of dorsal. At least dorsal is the doorway to dissociation. And in this place, these words are my clients' words. And I heard them over and over. So I finally put them on the map. Alone, lost, abandoned, unreachable. That's the dorsal experience. Alone, lost, abandoned, unreachable. Hopeless, we disappear. And safety and hope that live at the top of the ladder feel unreachable. Right? And the stories that appear here are stories that have some quality of despair. So whereas in ventral, I'm looking for friends, I feel a kinship. And in sympathetic, you've now gone from friend to foe. In dorsal, you often don't even exist, right? The world is gone, people are gone, I'm gone. So three very different experiences. So mapping, and that first map that you have is I find a very easy way to introduce polyvagal theory to my clients, right? Because we find ourselves. I have clients who tell me they see themselves in the science, right? I think that's a lovely way to do that. We find ourselves. And, I want you to do your map for yourself before you endeavor to do a map with a client, because you get to know, our maps are very similar, right? I've done thousands of maps now with people, and there's not a person who has a map that I can't say, oh, me too, right? So if you've done your map, you can then use your map to sort of guide the process. You can say, so for instance, here's what happens on my map in sympathetic or dorsal, right? And that's the template of the map that you have. And the things I want to recognize, you have the directions, so I'm not taking you through those, but those two statements, I am and the world is, when we fill those in from each state, we get the core beliefs that are at work in each state. Those are powerful sentences to fill in when we're doing this map. And then the boxes down the right-hand side are where you're invited to name your states in the way that feels right to your nervous system. I discovered early on that ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal were not the words of choice for many people. I still like them, I still use them, but for many people, they wanted something that was more personal, that felt less scientific. And so I added the boxes for you to name your states, and that's a connect with the nervous system and ask your nervous system, what does it want to be called in ventral, sympathetic, and dorsal? And you'll get interesting labels for your states. And then finally, here's a template, an example of what many maps have on them. And we'll just read the three I am okay, I am in the world is statements. We start in dorsal, and, some flavor of I am unlovable, invisible, lost, and alone. And the world is cold, empty, and uninhabitable. Right? You might even feel some of that come alive as we're saying it. And then in sympathetic, you can feel the difference. I'm crazy toxic. The world is unfriendly, scary, exploding. It's filled with energy here, right? And then if we come to ventral, there's energy, but it's a regulated energy, right? Sympathetic's a disorganized, chaotic energy. Dorsal has no energy. Ventral has organized, usable, welcoming energy. I am okay. That was what my clients told me most often. I am okay. Great. And the world is welcoming and filled with opportunity. Some flavor of that. So see what your map brings to you when you do it. And then when you have done your map, here's the practice. This is the basic notice and name practice. This is where we start. We do the map and then we do this. Notice where you are, name the state, either the biological name or the name you gave it, and then turn towards that experience for just a moment. Bring a bit of curiosity to the experience. I wrote curiosity, compassion, because compassion is also an emergent quality of ventral, which is what we want. But I find curiosity is really the place I begin. Compassion is much harder, but curiosity can be a bit curious about, oh, what's happening right now in my system? And then listen for a moment to the story of that state. What does that state want you to know? Right? And that's the basic practice. And really listen for a moment. So it really is like a 10 to 20-second practice. Don't listen longer than that. You're simply wanting to get the bullet points that state is trying to communicate with you when it has taken you to that state. And it could be a sympathetic or dorsal survival state, or it could be a ventral moment, right? So just make a practice of stopping to notice the name many times a day so that you get good at this. We're creating fluency in connecting with the nervous system. We're creating that new experience. We're befriending the nervous system and getting to know it in this way. All right, so I'm going to stop my share so that I can come back and be with all of you. And Kara can
Mhm. Thank you
come
so much.
and see what we have for questions,
We have
since we
quite a
just
few
sort of
questions.
we made a quick trip through.
Yes,
Yeah.
we sure did. I think we all are learning so much, and the people are chatting in to say that. We do have quite a few questions. If we could ask a few of them. Someone said that when they were using the vagal break, they started yawning. What does this mean?
Interesting. Yawning is something that there's a lot of discussion about what is that doing with your nervous system. I am not sure because the research is all over the place. One thing we do know is that yawning is your system saying, I need more oxygen. So there's that component. Other than that, I think I would just be curious about that. Hmm.
Great, thank you. Um, do we strengthen our neuroception to help regulate ourselves?
Well, neuroception is just happening. So we can't strengthen neuroception. We can bring perception to it, which is really the work we're doing with ourselves and then with our clients, is to understand that, oh, some cue of safety or danger has just entered my system and my nervous system is responding to that. So it's sort of the let's work with neuroception that then strengthens our ability to stay regulated. That's
Hmm.
how I would talk about it. Yeah.
Great. So it's not that we're strengthening neuroception.
No. Yeah. Strengthening our connection to it, our, you know what, because it's interesting to go a little bit further. Our neuroception is happening all the time. And yet, some of us, depending on where we have grown up, have been taught to not pay attention to it, right? Have been taught to ignore those inner experiences. I often call neuroception our autonomic intuition. And we've been taught, don't listen, don't respond, don't have a feeling, don't anything. And so in those cases, we're not strengthening neuroception, but we're reconnecting in a way that is useful. And so for myself, I know that's been a journey for me, and for most of my clients, that's the process we're in. Oh,
Thank you so
mm,
much. Yes. Um, one question somebody had, and so we're going to ask a few questions, and then we're going to have an opportunity for you to raise your hand, and you can speak directly to Deb. Okay, so I just wanted to say that really quickly. One question is, I'm curious about those who understand danger but go toward it. Any thoughts there?
well, again, if I would, if I had a client for whom that was the response, I would be curious about, when you are in this experience and moved to go towards what your brain might identify as dangerous, what's happening in your nervous system, because it may be some sort of a survival response. The question I often ask is, so if you weren't moving towards this, what might happen? Right? Because the nervous system is attempting to regulate and keep you safe in some way. And so if we say, so if you didn't, move towards, if that's a sympathetic, moving towards, if your sympathetic system didn't do that, what might happen? And the other question, if it's a dorsal, just going through the motions, I'm not really here and I'm moving towards, right? If that wasn't happening, what might happen instead? And that's where you get sort of the worry, the thing the nervous system's trying to protect you from. So that's where I'd be curious.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That makes so much sense.
Mm.
So just begin to have people recognize and feel it for a second.
Yeah, and the lovely thing about all of this is that when, I get asked these questions, and what I usually say is, "Oh, tell me more." Right? Because that's really what we're doing. It's like the nervous system is trying to tell us something, and I don't know what it is, so let's listen some more and find out what it's trying to tell us. If you're moving towards this dangerous moment, what's your nervous system trying to tell us? It's trying to tell us something, and I want to know. Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I just love that so much. Some people were asking about cues of safety. So, how can we replicate cues of safety if they aren't fully felt but only perceived?
Well,
So, we may
and
be able to talk about them, but maybe people aren't fully feeling them, is what I'm hearing.
right. So one of the ways we begin to identify if something is a cue of safety, and then how does it land in your nervous system, which is the question I always ask, is when we've done that map, cues of safety are going to bring you into that ventral part of your map. And so, and on the map, you're mapping behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and what happens in your body. For many clients, though, what's happening in my body may come after I understand the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and that's perfectly fine, right? But when you identify something as a cue of safety, that means that you have identified that it's moving you into ventral. So you've already got that part done. And then sometimes for me, I do the big comparisons. Like, how do you know? How does your nervous system tell you this is a cue of safety? Right. And I often do not use the word body. I will say that body can be a very dysregulating word for many clients. I use nervous system. It's like saying, how does your heart tell you, you've run too far, or how do your lungs tell you? How does your nervous system tell you this brings you to ventral? Right. And so oftentimes clients will be able to do that and say, so if you know how it takes you to sympathetic, people usually know that one, right? Because you can feel it. It's a really big response. So okay, so it didn't take you here. What did it do instead? Right. So these are some of the ways you can begin to play with that. And again, it's just, being more curious, right? So how does it tell you this? Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm,
Love it.
mm.
Okay. Um, someone chatted in. I'm wondering if people with a man-made pacemaker still have this vagal brake.
Yeah, and pacemakers are fascinating because they're now variable pacemakers, and they were not when they were first created. Pacemakers were a steady beat, and there's this beautiful chapter in the book that Steve and I co-edited, Clinical Applications of Polyvagal Theory. One of our colleagues wrote her experience about um, being born with a heart um, problem and having one of the first implantable pacemakers that was a steady beat, and how it impacted her profoundly, and how when she finally got one that had a mm, beat that changed according to needs, her everything else changed in her life. So it is really fascinating. So even, pacemakers now are going to respond to the ebb and flow, so you don't have to worry, but in the beginning they didn't. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have a question here about the description of the function of the vagal brake makes me think about panic attacks. Is there a connection between what happens with the vagal brake and panic attacks?
Yeah, so when the vagal brake can no longer hold, you're going to go into sympathetic fight, flight, and panic attacks happen in sympathetic. That's overwhelming sympathetic response. So yes, your vagal brake has disengaged. You no longer have it there, regulating your heart rate, and so you end up in that extreme experience of a panic attack. Yeah, yeah. So if you have clients who have panic attacks, or even struggle with a lot of anxiety, it's really interesting to explain to them the biology of the vagal brake and have them begin to work with it, because it's like it the thing I love about working with the nervous system and helping people become active operators of it is they no longer feel just simply at the mercy of whatever's going on, right? So even my clients who would move into extreme anxiety, knew that, oh, we can practice with a vagal brake, and it's going to begin to have some, um, it's going to shape my system in a new way. And then the thing to do with people, whatever it is, whether it's anxiety or depression, doesn't matter. You want to track the subtle shifts that are happening, right? So, just noticing. So let's think what happened different this past week with your nervous system. Not what was better, but what happened in a different way, right? Because that's really all we're trying to do is sort of track what's changing. And clients often wait for the great big change, and we therapists sometimes do as well. We want to track the subtle shifts that are happening. And so every week I would, ask my clients, so just, tell me something that was different this week with your nervous system, right? And we could begin to track that, and begin to build those moments, because those micro moments begin to build and then create larger shifts in the system.
Fantastic. Great. Somebody was asking, is the dorsal state also known as depression?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you are definitely in that dorsal place of shutdown. It's depression. Yes, yeah, yeah. It's fascinating. It's also, it's also a place of um, I like to think of the flavors, and I would like to just talk about the flavor of dorsal because it can be misunderstood. It also can simply be sort of I'm going through the motions without really being here state. That's one that many of us enter into many times in our lives. I'm going through the motions. I don't really have the energy to care that much, right? So that's another flavor of dorsal. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I just think all of this is so incredibly helpful. We do have a question around, can we use this work for families as well? So we know that families are part of a system, and that families, it seems to me that families also have their own nervous systems,
Yes. Yes.
correct? And so
Absolutely.
can we
Yeah.
apply this to family work as well?
Yes, absolutely, because we do. We each have a system. Oops. Our system is in connection with other systems, and so when I do couples work, family work, group work, it's all the same. I have everybody do their personal profile map, because that gives us a shared language and a shared understanding. And then we can begin to see each other through the lens of the nervous system rather than through the meaning making stories that we tend to go to. You know, if you think about couples, when two, you know, partners in a partnership each do their math and share that with each other, it is so lovely because they begin to see each other in new ways. You know, oh, it's not that you don't want to talk with me. It's that you've gone to a place where you aren't able to talk with me, right? It's a very different story, and it brings, incredibly powerful changes that happen. The same is true with parents and kids. And for
Mhm.
those of you who work with, kids, you know that you want somebody to be working with the parents because the kid is embedded in that dyadic relationship, or that, more than dyadic, in that family system. And it is the adults that are around the child that need to have a regulated nervous system. You know, the child's nervous system is responding to the nervous system of the adults around them. So especially with when I worked with families, I would really teach polyvagal to the adults first, and then we would all do a map. And once we all have a map, they were invited to put their maps somewhere in their home where they could refer to them all the time. So when somebody's getting a little dysregulated, go to the map and say, "Oh, I wonder where they are," right? Because that's what we need to know. And the kids would love to do that. They'd come in and say, "Oh, yeah, we went to the fridge and saw that mom had gone to sympathetic and needed some help finding her way back to ventral. This is perfect. Love it."
Uh,
So,
uh,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Use it with all combinations of people. It's great also if you work in an organization where you have a work group or colleagues and you all speak the language. It simply becomes a shorthand that is so easy to use, right? I mean, I could simply, tell you, Kara, that I'm feeling a lot of dorsal in my system today, and you would know, oh, I need to help Deb find a little energy so she can show up and teach, right? I don't need to tell you anything else. That is enough for you to be able to begin to know what I might need. So I think it's important to do with your colleagues as well.
yeah, I can see that. Foong, I'm going to start talking to you like that. Um, I would love, along the lines of working with children, I would love to hear some suggestions about how to adapt this to younger children, like 7 and below, for example, is in a way that's accessible to them. So, because it seems like a new language for even kids to understand their bodies. The kids are so in their bodies, right? So, is there any advice there?
Yeah, and I will, I'll send you a PDF of, I did a very basic kids map. It just has, instead of the words and stuff, it has images. I'll send that to you so you can send it out. But really what you want to do with kids is, you're using, I still think they like to know how this system that's in their body is organized. And I think it's an important thing for them to know. So I, like to do both the biological terms because I don't like to underestimate the people I'm working with. So I do the biological terms and then I say, and so what, when you're filled with all this energy and you're really mad at mom, right? Or you're running away because you don't want to be here anymore with all that energy. What would you call that, right? And kids are so easy. They're easily able to do this. They name their states beautifully. And the same with, when you just don't have the energy to even, try anymore. Right. And if you're a kid therapist, you know the language and you can do this easily. One of the other things we did with kids when we actually could be together with kids would be to have them choose objects that represent those three states. And that's an easy way. Build it in the sand. If you work in the sand, doing these maps in the sand is beautiful. I do that with my grown-ups, or I used to when I had an office. In the sand is a lovely way. And also, if you just set up three different spaces in your space, so you could even do that nowadays if you're working outside, if you're seeing kids outside, three different spaces in the environment that represent the three different states, and then they can go to the space and really inhabit it and get to feel it and play with it and what would they put in it and all of that. So kids are really fun to work with around this.
Oh, that's a great idea. I love that. They can actually bring this the states to life.
Mhm.
Along the states, so we're going to ask two more questions here. Then we're going to have you raise your hand if you want to talk to Deb. So somebody had a question around, I'd love to hear some examples of listening to the story of that state, if possible. Do you have any examples there?
Yeah, sure. If I'm and I have a practice that I do that's called listening to three stories. So maybe the easiest thing to do is to build that into the next time. But what happens is if you notice where you are right now, right? Notice, are you ventral? Do you have you gone to some fight and flight because I'm going too fast or you can't understand, or have you gone to dorsal because you've given up, right? And all I want you to do is just name that. And then for a moment, turn towards it and be a bit curious about what your state wants you to know about that. So if I did that right now, I'm pretty anchored in ventral, so I'm going to turn to my state and listen. And what it's telling me is you're fitting it all in. It's going to be okay. That's basically the story I hear, right? I also have a bunch of dorsal in the background, which is not uncommon for me. So if I listen to my dorsal for a minute, it's telling me um, um, too much overload. Um, should do less. It's got that energy of ugh, right? And if I listen to sympathetic, which I said I don't want to leave that out. If I listen to sympathetic for a moment, sympathetic is really revving me up and saying, come on, you got a few more things you got to get through before 12 minutes ends, right? So that's my experience of listening to three states. It's a simple, just tune in and just listen to the highlights of what that state wants you to know, right? I do that practice with clients early on once they've done their map, because you get such very different stories from each state, and clients get really intrigued by that because they think they're stuck in one story. They think this is their story. And when you let them know, oh, but there are two other stories at all times, because we always have three. We got three states. They're always bringing a story. It's really intriguing to them to think, oh, but I have these other two stories too, right? And then the next part of the work is, how do I access the other stories?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Wow. Okay, the last question, and then please raise your hand, and we'll take you in order for the last remaining time. So, how can you do this work with folks in settings and environments that actually don't feel safe? For example, correctional facilities or detention settings.
Yeah. So working in the prison jail system is challenging because we want our clients to understand their nervous systems, and they need to have a healthy amount of sympathetic energy on board in order to be alert and stay safe, right? So I worked with people in pre-adjudication for quite a while, and it was interesting to help them be able to map their state and understand where they are, and know that when they then went to prison, they would be safer if their vagal brake was still on but released to the edge, so they really had a lot of energy, than they would be if they went to sympathetic fight flight, or especially into that dorsal disconnect. So it's interesting. And if you're working with clients who come to you and then go back to dangerous environments, the same is true. And I've done a lot of that work. And what I've discovered is the moments they're with me, the hour they're with me, their nervous system can really connect and take that in. And I always reassure my clients that when you leave here and go back into that dangerous environment, your nervous system is going to remember how to keep you safe. Right? It doesn't forget, just because we also have this time when you can feel a bit safe and begin to dip into what that might feel like. So I guess that's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, our systems are so amazing.
Hmm.
So, David, you have your hand raised. What would you like to ask Deb?
Yeah, kind of a two-part question here. In doing meditation on the breath with somebody, does that it seems to me that that would activate more the ventral system, because you're really working on dealing with the breath. But it also strikes me that for a person with anxiety issues or something like that, it can also activate fight or flight because just feeling it so much, or lead to collapse because it's like, I can't do this right. Your
Absolutely.
take on it. Okay.
Absolutely. I am very careful when I introduce breath because my work is with complex trauma survivors, and breath is a direct route to changing your nervous system state and is also a high activator of survival states. And so I usually start by just saying, "Okay, let's just notice our breath." Right. And you notice I say, let's notice our breath. I don't say, let's notice your breath. I'm always doing this with my client because, again, in the next session, we're going to talk about co-regulation. The nervous system wants to know it's not alone in this. So let's just notice our breath, because even noticing changes it in some way. It slows it a bit and deepens it a little bit. And so maybe noticing is all we can do at the moment, because yes, when we begin to do conscious breathing, and slowing the breath, and deepening, right? That is either a cue to the sympathetic system to activate to make sure that doesn't happen because it feels really dangerous, or to dorsal to simply disconnect and shut down, because as we, instead of coming slower, we go to shut down. So yes, but I think you're right on, David. Both of those are challenges to the nervous system, and we want to talk about that before we talk about breathing with our clients, and then track very carefully with them. Like, do a, a 10-second practice, and then, okay, where's your nervous system taking you now, right? And then keep that.
So would another mindfulness practice be something as simple as opening and closing the hand, which would not access those interior?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna talk about that one too, because that's a movement that can be seen on the outside. And so
Uh-huh.
where I start with that is, imagine opening and closing your hand. Because for some people, being seen on the outside is also too much for the nervous system. So I start with imagine enacting that movement. And then if that feels safe enough, see if your nervous system wants you to try it. Right. And for some people, the imagining is where they can do it safely, and the actual doing and being seen doing it is too much. Right. And what I tell them is, it's okay, because when you imagine, your motor cortex is still lighting up and you're still getting benefit of it. So it's fine. What we want to do is we want to honor the wisdom of your nervous system. So we're going to give lots of choices. Right.
Thank you so much on that.
You're welcome. I love the questions. Thank you.
Anybody else want to ask Deb a question directly? Please raise your hand. Lee?
I see real hands.
Okay, some real hands.
I don't know how to do it on Zoom.
Leith,
Can
Anthony,
we,
and Michelle.
Deb, what'd you say? I'm sorry.
I was saying Leith, Anthony, and Michelle. I saw your hands going up. So hi, Leith.
Hi, Deb. Can we use your material with clients?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And do you have, like offline or whatever, a list of polyvagal informed therapists that we may refer to?
I do not. That I don't. I have not figured that out yet. So no. One yes, one no. How about that?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Anthony, you want to unmute yourself?
There we go. If somebody's in a state of like hyperarousal, mobilized, then, so what I'm trying to check my understanding here. So to get to the ventral, they open their brake, or
To
like,
get to the ventral, they have to put on the brake. They have to slow down a bit. And in order
Okay.
to do that, because in that hypervigilant, had that really mobilized place, they're filled with energy, but the energy is disorganized. It's not moving them in some way. It's all over the place. And
Yeah.
so for me, engaging the brake means let's organize the energy in some way. I never say calm down, because for me, that's the wrong direction. I started saying calm up. We got to come up to ventral. So we don't want to just not have that energy in your system. We want to use it, organize it in a way that's useful, and your vagal brake can then come back on more and bring you to ventral. And often, movement, walking, getting up, doing a movement together, or some sort of a rhythmic movement helps to organize, because then it doesn't feel so all over the place. When I had an office, we would have physio balls and sit on the physio balls, because you have to regulate your movement in some way to stay on the physio ball. So those sorts of things, ways of channeling that energy so that it will bring you up, and vagal break re-engages more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like, because I'm interested in the place where the person, it's hard for them to connect to anything because they're so revved up.
Right. And that's where, in the next session, we're going to talk about, that's where your nervous system is the thing that reaches out to connect with them. And you reach out from your anchor in ventral, but with your vagal brake really released a lot. So you have lots of energy in your system, so that you're meeting that nervous system with energy, but organized energy. And so that other nervous system says, oh, there's a system that's somewhere near where I am. Right. Because if I come to you, if you're really in that sympathetic, revved up, angry, riled up, anxious place, and I come to you with my, oh, let's see if we can come together to ventral, your nervous system, sends you the message that total mismatch, right? I'm not even going to pay attention to that. But if I come to you and say, wow, I can really feel how much energy there is flooding your system right now, and
Okay.
let's see if we can organize it in some way so we can use it and listen to it. Then the
Yeah.
nervous system says, oh, maybe, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. Because we really want to always let the other nervous system know we're respecting it, and we want to hear it, right? I want to know what it's trying to tell me. It's trying to tell me something, I don't know what. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Michelle, you're our last question for the day, and then
Right.
wrap up.
Okay. So I wanted to, how do the senses play into this? I do a lot of work with my client around activating all the senses. And is that another way to harness the vagal? I guess it's being the senses of listening to all the senses to have you be aware and in the moment, and that allows you to access the vagal.
Well, if I'm able to be in the moment and listen to my senses, I already have ventral on board, because it's allowing me to be here. So that the sense of tuning into my senses is supported by my ventral vagal system. And I'm getting all these cues of safety and danger through my senses, right? Through what I'm seeing,
Right.
hearing, through another person's voice. So the senses play a big role in
They're
this.
more information.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
information.
And then we can begin to use them. We first do the information gathering, and then we can begin to use them. Like if I know there's certain sounds that bring me a ventral experience, I can begin to build those sounds in, or sights, if there's certain image, whatever. So then you begin to use them, right? Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a
Thank you,
great
Michelle.
lecture. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much. So just a quick reminder, part 2 is next Tuesday, March 30th at the same time. And I wanted to let you know about a few upcoming events from CTAC. Foon, if you could go to the next slide, we have Applying MI to support the coming out of LGBTQ youth on March 29th on Monday, and then Applying MI as a therapeutic approach to support adjustment, which is Wednesday, April 14th. So those are a few of our offerings that are upcoming. And I just want to again thank you, Deb, so very much for being here and sharing your
You're
wisdom.
welcome. And
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody, you're invited to complete your personal profile map so that you know your system, and to play with your vagal brake.
Fantastic. 2 things to do before the next time we meet, so we could talk about them when we come back together. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take good care. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.